What's up everybody, I'm Justin. In today's video, we're reviewing the Blackmagic Design Studio 4K Pro camera. Cue the montage. Alright, let me start off this video by saying that this video is not sponsored in any way, shape, or form. Now, obviously, I'm a little bit of a Blackmagic fanboy, and I have been for some time. I am that way because of the cost that they are doing and the quality that they're doing. Do I think that they're the best cameras and the best equipment out there? In some forms, yes. In some forms, no. Do I think that they are the best out there for the cost? Hands down, yes. I think that what they're doing is amazing, and I think we're getting closer and closer to seeing them become one of those staple big cameras that big production companies use, like an RE or a Red. We're not there yet, but I think that they're trending in that direction as we are seeing pocket cameras and the Ursas become more and more used in some of the smaller rolled things. So I want to say that Blackmagic has really stepped it up with the studio camera, and I'm actually pretty impressed. What I think that they're trying to do is Blackmagic has done the two things. They were in the cinema world, and then they were trying to get into the what I would call the broadcast world for like cable news, local, like smaller, publicly funded or small little like city news, or even some school like news where it's not necessarily not live, but it's a lot more controlled. Unlike the cinema world where I get to do a bunch of different things and set it up and focus it and take a single shot 1,400 times. It's a little bit different, obviously. What I don't think that they were anticipating was the live scenario in the church world, and even more so like some more conferences type thought process where things aren't necessarily always in a controlled environment. When I have pastor moving all over the place and I have different lighting from worship to speaking, there's just all these different things. They kind of created the first studio camera to be in a controlled studio environment. Tons of light, I want to be completely lit up, and that's not necessarily what we were wanting in worship. We tend to run our lights a little bit darker during worship to be a little bit more intimate, set some more ambiance in the room, versus like preaching where lights are fully on, pastor's completely lit, that type of thought. So I felt like in the first studio camera that it was a great addition because it gave us, the SDI outs on it that we wanted. It gave us the built-in touchscreen that at the time the cinema camera had, but the cinema camera was again a cinema camera. So it didn't give us the frame rates that we wanted, and it just kind of didn't function in that kind of realm that we wanted it to. What they're doing in this camera is it definitely feels that they are trying to bridge that gap of that controlled environment versus a live, semi-uncontrolled environment. So I think that that's really important to see here. Most of you already know what Blackmagic has already done in this camera. Most of it is the same as the last one. Some of the biggest things that they changed are kind of some placements, a little bit of the look. It's a little bit different looking than the first one, but not by much. But yeah, most of you already know that. What I'm going to kind of go over in this video, the things that I like and the things I don't like. The three things that I was super excited about in this were as follows. The sensor update, 13 stops of dynamic range. It's a micro four thirds lens that's very, very similar to the Pocket 4K sensor. It's not quite the same. It's about 1 millimeter smaller, but the dynamic range that we're getting out of this sensor is very, very similar to what we're getting out of the Blackmagic Pocket camera, 4K. The next big thing for me was that you now have, bam, this nice little USB plug, two of them, dose, not just one, but two. And that's for you to be able to record what you are broadcasting live. That's great because I know in a lot of scenarios that we want to ISO cameras and we don't want to necessarily spend tons and tons of money on, you know, decks and decks and decks. This way I get to spit out whatever I want: film mode, extended video, video mode. It's all in 4K and only in 4K. You don't get to change the resolution. You can change the frame rate, so that's cool. But I get to record it in however I want to, and then from there I still get the SDI feeds out that can be in whatever video mode that I want them to be in. So my live broadcast still looks great how I want it to live, but then I get to play with it later. Super huge. That's a massive, massive deal. Then to follow that up, the second port can be used for the next thing that I'm super excited for. The biggest problem that I always had was having hand controls for the lens. And I always had to buy third party and they didn't always work, and that was very frustrating. So now that Blackmagic has come out with the little hand controls, the zoom and the focus, they can daisy chain through each other into USB-C. That's a huge, huge deal for me. Super excited about it. So those are the biggest things that they updated on this camera that I love. They updated more things than that, like the tally light, getting comms going through the SDI. Super big deal, just not as big of a deal as the other ones. The last thing that's super cool for me and super exciting is what I hate is multiple cables. And so with the introduction to the 10K NIC for RJ45 on here, the thing that makes that so big of a deal for me is that now I get to run one Cat6 cable to the camera, and that's gonna power the cable, send the video, and send comms and control for the camera all through that one thing. That's a big, big deal, because now I'm not having multiple cables draped down. I don't have the weird power cable that's not quite long enough to reach all the way to the floor and I have to tape it somewhere. It's just a huge deal. That's why it's so impressive. I get that you have to buy a secondary piece of equipment to do that, but that's totally worth it for the longevity and the life of the cable, and honestly just how clean it looks. I don't know, you tell me down in the comments, is that as big of a deal to you as it is to me? I'd like to know. The last thing that I think is that I love about it is the user interface. It is almost exactly like the pocket cameras. It's super straightforward, it's simple. You don't need to be a pro to navigate through it. It's laid out really well, and I really appreciate that, because especially in the church world, most of our volunteers are exactly that. They're volunteers. This is the only camera that some of them will ever touch in their entire life. And it's just a big deal for me, especially when I'm trying to train people, and most people don't like to volunteer because they think things are complicated. If I can stick them in front of a camera and go, hey, you know, here's the menu if you need to navigate through it, and it's pretty simplistic. That's a huge, huge deal on the volunteer side of it. All right, so there's a few things about the camera that I don't like, and these aren't game changers or things that are so bad that I'm like, oh, I'm never gonna buy this camera, it's horrible. I really do wish that they had an EF version that came out at the same time, and I know that that has a lot to do with the sensor size that they were putting in this, but I kind of wish that the Pro version would have had a bigger sensor. Kind of like how they have the 6K is EF, and that the 6K Pro is also EF, and then also like the Ursa, anything with the Super 35 in it has the EF mount. I really wish they would have came out with an EF mount version of this. And when they announced it, they said, so you can use all the current lenses you have. So I guess if you already have the studio camera, you can keep using those lenses. That's nice. And I think that that's why I wish there would have been a third version of this, so that I had that option, but if I wanted EF lenses, I could do that as well. The next thing, I did a test shot with this, and the biggest thing that I had a problem with is that I had to have the camera so high to get over top of everyone's heads that I kind of wish it would have had a screen that tilted. And so the 6K Pro, how it has like that little like bump out screen that just like kind of tilts down a little bit. Tilts up a little bit. I wish that this screen like would tilt down, just so that if I have to be below the camera a little bit, I'm not seeing like this off angled like image of it, or trying to find a way to get up a little bit higher. That not the end of the world. Again, none of these things that I hate about this camera or don't like about the camera, not hate, are game changers. They're just, you know, like critiques. The next thing is, and this is like some more of like just like live and learn, is that they have all of these knobs for brightness, contrast, that kind of stuff that and maybe this is just me being kind of dumb, I assumed that they were controlling the actual physical image and not just the screen. they're controlling just the screen. So I had originally my brightness was all the way down and my contrast was all the way down. Honestly, I wasn't really paying attention to the contrast. The brightness, I started it with all the way down because I wanted to start with it as dark as possible and then start to bring it up. And so I ended up being at like a quarter brightness, and then the event that I was doing is in a room that's under construction, so they had no face light. It was just house lighting. And I'll show you a clip here. But I realized like halfway through that I was recording it, and what I was recording was different than what I was seeing on the screen. And that was a little frustrating because like on the pocket cameras, it kind of comes, the screen is like, it's there. And then as you're adjusting, you know, your brightnesses and your ISOs and stuff like that, that's what changes it. Where this actually gives you full screen control, which I understand why they did it. And now that I'm aware that it's controlling the screen, it makes sense. But jumping from the cinema cameras to the broadcast, it kind of did just trip me up a little bit. Some of that was also the event I was doing was kind of chaotic, so I wasn't like super paying attention. So there's a little bit of those that, you know, that play into that. And again, not a big deal. The function buttons are great. The on off is great. I like that it's a little bit harder to accidentally flip off. And I like the screen protector / hood. The screen looks great. The tally lights are great. Having the comms, like I said. Overall, I love this camera. If you are anything below 500 people, you probably are great with this camera. And you can get a 70-200 and be really happy with it. Blackmagic, good job. Keep up the good work. Keep pushing forward on these. Keep going. I like this idea. I like the studio option. I like how cheap it is. I think I wish the Ursa broadcast was a little bit more like this. So maybe coming up with like a hybrid between the Ursa broadcast and the studio, like the big body. I don't have a problem with the big body. I like the screen. I like the layout of this because it feels more broadcast, where the Ursa broadcast just feels like they took the Ursa and they threw some extra SDI cables onto it and gave you some controls. I think I'd like to see some sort of hybrid between the two for like the bigger live productions. I don't really see a lot of Blackmagic cameras being put into the realms of like some of the larger churches, you know, like the Gateways, Elevations, Life Churches. I don't see them really using any Blackmagic products on the live side of things. I know that like Hillsong uses a lot of Blackmagic stuff, like for their pre-recorded things. I think a lot of people do, and I think that's because that's where Blackmagic's really shining and really pushing. So I think that that's probably the biggest thing, but overall, love this camera. Keep up the good work, and let me know in the comments down below what you think. Have you tried this camera? Are you hesitant to this camera? What cameras are you using? I'd love to know. Don't forget to hit subscribe. That's that big red button down in that corner. If you're watching me on Rumble, smash that Rumble button. Would really love to see you guys over on Rumble as well. Make sure you're checking me out on Instagram and the old podcast, which you can find on Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can get a lot of this content there. Let me know what other products you would like me to review and get my thoughts on. Love to hear that as well down in the comments. And this video is not sponsored. Don't forget. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Late nights keeping me company.